you on the credits, man.
Just got on
Camera operator. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here.
Glad you finally got here.
We won't go into the story about how I got here. But anyway, it's a real pleasure to do this project to honor your mom and dad. It's been a great treat for me. And this is sort of the capstone of what I've been learning about is coming to talk to you and getting your insight.
Better than a headstone.
All right, so
Oop.
that's going to be good. So everybody would put up on a pedestal the idea of, oh, you're Roy and Dale's son.
Mm-hmm.
What was the reality of having your mom and dad be so popular?
Well, the reality of being Roy and Dale's son, and in that spotlight, as you would say, all of us kids were in the same spotlight. Whether it was me or one of the adopted kids or Robin, or when you come into because both mom and dad, Roy and Dale, were both famous by the time a lot of us got in the family. So we had to kind of fit in to something that we didn't know anything about or were used to. And a lot of people say, well, when did you know your dad was famous? And I said, well, I really didn't know he was famous at all until I was probably 5. I mean, I went to the movie set with him when I was 2. I spent every birthday I can think of from 2 to 5 on the movie set with Dad. So then all of a sudden the reality came in that this man does something other than just movies. He's very popular with the populace, with the people. And of course, when we would go out on the road with him, all of a sudden we're surrounded by thousands of people, and especially young kids who loved him. And it was a little bit difficult to swallow sometimes. You know, you want your mom and dad to yourself. You don't want to share them with anybody, you know, when you're young like that. I mean, wait a minute, that's my mom and dad. What are you doing, you know? So it was difficult in that way. And I think all of us grew up under that veil of constantly being photographed, constantly being on the road, constantly being Roy and Dale's son or daughter. You know, it didn't matter if you were adopted or not. You were Roy and Dale's son or Roy and Dale's daughter. And it wasn't easy. It just really wasn't easy because of having to share and everything. But again, we being young kids, we adapted, and most of us got along with it pretty good.
Now, you're the only mother that you know is Dale, but she's not your biological mother.
Yes. Yeah, Dale is my mother. I mean, my biological mother passed away when I was just a few days old. I never got to know my natural mother. I was born by cesarean section, and she got an embolism in her system, which at the time in the 40s, this was 1946, and they didn't have any way of detecting blood clots, and this blood clot had formed during the cesarean operation. And it just kind of sat dormant there in her system because there was no way of detecting them. And they didn't get the ladies up and walk around like they do today after childbirth to help dissolve these clots away. So this one just sat dormant in Mom's system for about 4 days, 5 days. And when she became more active, so did the clot. It began to move through her system, unbeknownst to anybody. And actually, I was on the bed ready to come home, and Dad was on his way to get us. And Mom just, this embolism hit her heart, and her eyes rolled back in her head, and she just fell back on the bed and was gone that quick. No indication at all that there was a problem. So, you know, of course, for my dad, it was devastating. He has 3 kids and King of the Cowboys, and 1946 was the height of the man's career, and then all of a sudden, overnight, he finds himself a widower with 3 young'uns and absolutely nobody in his life at that point to take care of us kids. So he had to really jump on it at a bad time of his life and try to get somebody in to take care of us, and he hired nannies to watch out over us. So I never got to know my real mom. And then when I was about 1.5 years old, he married Dale, and she just kind of stepped in and really took over with us kids, and we just loved her to death. I mean, all of us did. I think Cheryl had a little bit of a problem with her early on because Cheryl was she was the first one in the family. Dad adopted her first, and because they didn't think that my mom and Roy could have children, so they adopted Cheryl, and she was kind of the queen bee. She was the one that, the oldest one, and she wanted to be the mom. I mean, she did. She wanted to take care of me and Linda Lou, and she just thought she'd step into that role after what she called her mommy, passed away. And of course, it didn't happen. Dad needed some adults to do it. So, but when Dad married Dale, because it was kind of funny because Cheryl would always get between Dale and Roy at events and stuff to try to keep them separated. But you know, it was just the good Lord. It was meant to be, and it didn't work out. But Dale was my mother. I mean, she came in, and when I was 1.5 years old, and all of us kids just loved her to death. And I never knew any other mothers, so. She was, you know, mother means a lot of things to different people. There's your birth mother, and then of course you don't know much about your mother till you get older. Well, that's where I would, and Dale was my mom by that time, so I couldn't ask for a better one. Couldn't ask for a better one.
Another situation where someone had a different mom than what they would normally had, or who called themselves mother, was
Right.
Tom and Grandma Smith.
Right.
Tell me a little bit about Grandma Smith.
Well, Tom and Grandma Smith. Grandma Smith was Dale's mother, of course, and she was basically like my mother. She was one that took charge of everything. I mean, if there was something needed to be done, she jumped right on it and got it done. She was there was no holds barred and no stepping back or any excuses. Grandma Smith was a lady who was raised in a church-going family and in Texas, and she and Dad used to always say, you know, you can tell a Texan, but not much. And Grandma Smith was that person, and we just loved her too. She lived long enough to see my son Dustin born, and she loved little boys. So when I came along, boy, she was all over me. Grandma Smith was, and she was quite the lady. She was very proper, prim and proper, and always dressed, you know, to the nines. Like she was going to church every Sunday, whether it was at dinner or whatever. But very, very sweet lady, and she stayed with us at the house quite a bit toward the end of her life, and then she had to end up in a home. But she stayed at the house for the longest time, and it was really frail and stuff. But she still would sit and spend hours talking with you if you come in and sit by her bedside. And very sweet lady.
What would you have to say to your Grandma Smith if you could say something to her?
You know, Grandma Smith, she just, she was kind of the strong, a real strong person, like Dale was. I mean, Mom was very strong too. I mean, she gleaned a lot from her mother. Grandma Smith, I wish she could be here to see all of my grandsons. I have 4 grandsons, and she loved little boys, so she loved us, and she got to hold him when he was little. We took him to the convalescent home, and she got to spend a little time with him. But she would have loved all the grandsons and all of the grandsons and daughters that have come into this family, the Rogers family, since she passed. I mean, she would just be thrilled to see them. So I hope someday when if we behave ourselves, we'll all get together and she'll be able to see all of them.
Now, Tom was not raised by Dale his whole life, is that correct?
Pretty much so, yes, yes. Tom was very frail as a child. He probably told you. He was kind of a sickly child. He had a hard time. He had problems breathing, and I think allergies bothered him a lot. And Mom tried to take him with her, and they ended up in Chicago, and both of them just about died there. I mean, the weather was cold, and Tom was just sick all the time. I mean, Mom said we were trying to eat off, take one egg and beat it into an omelet and share, give most of it to him, just trying to get by. And when Mom was singing radio and big band, and it was tough. And Mom knew that she couldn't take care of him on the road. It just wasn't the thing. So she sent him home to live with Grandma Smith. And at the time it was hard for her, but it's hard to let your child go and live with anybody. I don't care if it's a relative or whatever. You feel like you're failing somewhere that you can't even take hold of your own child. But she knew, because of his health condition, that if it continued much longer, he might not survive this. So, and it was the best thing for Tom, because he had some ground. He had something he could ground to, and because jumping around as a young boy from hotel to hotel and from state to state, it's not good. And as far as his education goes, that was kind of here and there. And Mom just thought he needs to be with Grandma, and he let him go back and stay with her. And I'm sure it hurt my mom terribly to do that, but it was the only option she had. I mean, she had him when she was 14. I mean, good grief. just a child herself. So she had to do what she had to do, and Grandma Smith raised him his entire life. And so whatever Tom is or hoped to be, he owes to his grandma, because she stepped in when Mom couldn't do it.
The love story between your mom and dad can be called, I would say, nothing more than divinely orchestrated, given it was marriage number 8 between them.
Right.
I think.
Yes.
So there's a lot of heartache along the way for
Well,
them to get together. And tell us sort of how that.
well, the love story of Roy and Dale is complicated, to say the least. And of course, they all had, when you're young and stuff, you make mistakes and things don't work out for you. But if we were all allowed to step back from our life a little bit, like a lot of people have said, when I felt like I went to heaven and I separated from my body and I floated up and I could see everything. If we could do that with our own lives somehow and see where we're going, then we might have some purpose on what we think we need to be doing. But when you're young and you're trying to survive, and this was back in the 20s and 30s, when Mom and Dad really got started in that entertainment end of the thing, it was tough. I mean, just to survive, to make enough money to get where you're going, and so you do things you have to do to try to make it from point A to point B. And if you look at both Mom and Dad's lives and see how things came together and fell apart, it seems to me that they started from two ends of the planet, basically. Ohio and Texas is a big difference, and they just started coming together. And little things here and there, the good Lord either put in the way to make them go a different direction, or pull out so they could go the direction that He wanted them to do. And if you look at their life and the love story between the two, it just had to happen. And when they did their very first movie together in 1944, called The Cowboy and the Senorita, you could just see it on the screen that there was something there. And of course, Dad was still married to my mother, but Roy and Dale had such a good chemistry and worked together so well. And so when my mom passed away, everybody said, oh, well, eventually, Roy's and Dale will get married. And everybody said, oh, no, that's not going to happen. But, the good Lord stepped in and allowed it to happen. And boy, what a difference. I mean, you have these two powerhouses working, because Mom was in film, already doing film. Dad, of course, was a big star over at Republic at that point. Mom was a big band singer. She didn't want to be in Westerns at all, but she ended up, that's another thing that just the good Lord said, okay, send her out on location, have her try out with Roy. And for some reason that came about and tried out. But there was a chemistry between the two that at first wasn't a love chemistry at all. It was just, they played off of each other so well. In your life, you meet some people that you just seem like you put on an old pair of boots, then they just fit you and you say, wow, I'm never going to get rid of these boots, and you never do. And that's just the way it was with Roy and Dale. They just seemed to fit together well. And of course, then it became a little more romantic, and then of course, when then they decided to have one of their own children after my mom had passed away, and I was about 1.5 years old, and he and Dale married, still young enough to have kids of their own. And so then they were able to have a child between the two of them. So everything was put in place and just was a divine, like you said, it was a divine guided two lives that converged and made a huge impact. Could they have done it on their own? Probably. But together, wow.
And they were exactly alike, right?
Oh, well, no, they say opposites attract, and it's true. My dad was an old country boy, and things didn't really matter to him, and he just loved to hunt and fish and do what he wanted to do. Dale, and the Westerns, Dad fit into the Westerns just like a pair of good boots. Mom didn't. She could care less about the Westerns. She was an ingenue. She wanted to be the big band singer. She came out to California to work in Busy Berkeley's musicals, and that's what she wanted to do, big band singer, And they sent her out to audition with Dad, and they were looking for Fox was actually Republic was looking for a new leading lady for Dad, someone who could sing, do everything. And so they called over to Fox and they said, do you have anybody that we need a young leading lady for Roy Rogers? And they said, well, sure we do. Her name's Dale Evans. And they said, well, the thing is, she has to be beautiful. She has to sing like a bird. And she has to be able to set a horse. She needs to be able to ride. Oh yeah, Dale will fit. She's from Texas. She'll fit the point. Mom had not been on a horse since she was 3 or 4 years old on her mom's farm, Mom and Dad's farm. So, and again, the good Lord stepped in. Mom went out to location, dressed to the nines, thinking she was going to try out for this music thing. And she showed up in a long dress and thinking she was going to play. And the next thing they know, the director said, Dale, we want you to get up on this horse. We want you to ride to the end of the street and sit there with Roy and Gabby and Big Boy Williams. And when I throw my hat down, I want you all to ride to the camera. And when you get close, just pull up on your horse, and we'll see how you look on horseback. So she did. She got on a horse. I mean, Mom was a trooper. I mean, like Dad said, you can tell a Texan, but not much. You cannot tell Dale she can't do something, because she'll just prove you wrong every time. So she got on a horse, and they took off running, and they came to the camera, and the guy dropped his hat, and they pulled up. And when they did, the horse just jammed Mom into the saddle. Just pounded her because she didn't know how to set it right. And it broke, it knocked the caps off of her teeth, and Big Boy Williams' horse set on her teeth and they were all jagged, and she had to have them redone. But then the producer said, well, Dale, that wasn't too bad. Well, Roy, what do you think? And Dad said, I think it was Billy Whitney at the time, and he said, Billy, I swear I have never seen so much sky between a woman's rear end and a saddle in my life. But she learned to ride, and I think she did something totally against what she really wanted to do, because at that time you did what you needed to do to make money to survive. And but she fit in so well and did it so well. Dad, he just had to be himself, but Mom was totally opposite, but she learned to adapt and go along with what the thing was, which was Western and cowboy songs, and that's way away from big band and big orchestra music. But Mom was a trooper, and just always, whatever the situation was, she stepped in and said, well, I'm going to do it, and did.
So take me to, you wouldn't have remembered this, but I'm sure you've heard it enough times in stories, but when she was then married to Roy, expecting a baby girl, I don't doubt they would have known it was a girl, but tell me what was she like? I mean, she would have the American dream at that point.
Right.
A family, a baby, a husband, a career. And
That's
tell
right.
me about
That's
how
right.
she was at that point.
Well, she, after the birth of Tom, I'm sure, and then of course her husband left her when she was just young. And of course then she was, like I said, starving and trying to make a career. So she, and she just, I'm sure she longed for another child, but on the other hand too, when she came to Hollywood, and I'm sure Tom told you that they told her that you can't mention the fact that you have this son. See, that was the way Hollywood was at those times. So I think she always longed for a child, and so when she married Roy and they had a chance to have a child of their own, they jumped right on it, and of course Robin, Mom, I mean, she just glowed everywhere she went, and even then, when they would go there, I remember they went to New York, and they were staying in a hotel and they had to do a publicity shot. And Mom's sitting there, and of course she's out to here, and Dad's standing behind her, and the photographer said, "Oh, we can't. That's not going to look good with Dale out there. So he grabbed this whole bouquet of flowers that was in a vase and set it on her lap. So the picture was taken with her holding his vase. I don't know what the stigma was about showing pregnant women at that time. I guess that was the problem. But she was just ecstatic all the time. Both Dad and Mom were on cloud nine that they were going to have a child, and looking forward to its birth. And then of course when Robin was born and found out that she had Down's syndrome, again, it was a shock, original, you know, I mean, you're never ready for that. But then it settled in that this is a lovely human being that's from both of us. You know, there must be a reason why. They didn't know, nobody knew at that time what caused Downs. And they recommended that they put her in an institution. The doctor said, you need to put her in an institution. And Dad said, are you kidding me? He said, we're not putting her in an institution. She says, this is our child. We're going to take her home and love her. And so against the doctor's orders, they did. They took her home and made us, Dad built a special area for her to protect her from us kids, you know, because she was very fragile. But even during the time that Robin was there and very ill, they just, both of them just loved that little girl to death. I mean, it was part of them, and they wanted her. Of course, we all wanted her to survive. The doctor said that probably she wouldn't, but you don't know that. You know, had we had the medications they have today for Down syndrome children, Robin probably could have lived into her 40s or 50s. We don't know, but it was a gift from God, and Dad always says, when you never give a gift up, you never throw it away. A gift is a gift, no matter who gives it to you, you keep it. And she was not only a gift to Roy and Dale, but a gift to all of us kids who got a chance to know her.
Did you like to play with her?
Oh, I did all the time. I was 4 and 5, you know, at the time, and I couldn't physically, you know, wrestle with her like I really wanted to, but she and I communicated. She couldn't speak, of course, but we communicated. She had certain giggles and laughs she'd do, and she would, we would play hide and seek. I'd get under the crib, you know, and I'd reach up and touch her arm, and she'd giggle and roll, try to see where I was, and that's the kind of play we had. But she was just a sweetheart. I still see her eyes and her looking through the bars of that crib today. I mean, she just was, and that's why those kids are so special to me today. My son Dustin and I, we work with a group out of Texas called DRI, which is Development Resources Inc., and they have group homes for kids that have Downs, and we work with help raising money, because a lot of them now, a lot of those, I tell people that people bring them to the show, the Down syndrome kids, and I'll say, you know how lucky you are that you have one of these special children? I said, God don't give them to everybody. You know, he picks and chooses who he wants to have them. And they're his angels. It doesn't matter what color they are. They all have the same look, and they all love music, and they love people. They have their ups and downs like everybody does. You know, their moments of angry and little fits and stuff, but they love you unconditionally. And the only other person I know that does that is either a dog or God that loves you unconditionally. I mean, no matter what happened. And that's what's special about them. And so they've always been special to me and always will be. I mean, they're just wonderful, wonderful gifts from God. And of course, Mom and Dad knew that from the beginning, that it was a gift. And that's why Mom wanted to write about it. She was puzzled for the longest time on how I need to tell Robin's story, but I don't know how. Where do I go? And so she sat on a park bench in New York and said, God, I don't, you know, give me some direction on how to write this book, this Angel Unaware book I want to write. And she said it was just an amazing thing that the good Lord put on her heart. Well, don't you tell the story, let Robin tell the story. She says, I didn't hear it vocally, but that's what came to me. And so that started it, and boy, she got right on it and wrote it out, and it was just right from Robin's mouth, you know. So sometimes God gives you gifts and you recognize them and you expound upon them. Sometimes he gives you gifts, you don't see it, you're not paying attention, and you lose it. So you got to jump on every blessing you get in this life.
Tell me about blessings that you might walk past, not stop to pick up.
Well, blessings come in all kinds, and I have a lot of people that come to the show, and a lot of them are, you know, we do Dustin, my son, does a little thing he does on some Christian music, you know, sings Jesus Loves Me, things that we remember when we were kids. And you grow up in that, knowing that there is a God out there, but sometimes you get, people will say to me, you know, well, you know, God doesn't answer prayer anymore. He's not listening. And I always say, well, maybe you're not listening or looking. You know, maybe you got your ears closed, or maybe your attention somewhere else. And And this last year, in the spring of this last year, I heard a lady on, and I wish I knew her name. I don't, because I'd like to give her credit for it. But they were talking about blessings in life, and that sometimes we ask the Lord for blessings or ask Him to do things for us, and some things we deserve. Sometimes, if He doesn't want us to have it, He's not going to provide. So we spend our time going through life, looking up. God, where are you? How come you didn't? We very seldom look down. And this young lady said, I want you to do a test to prove that that you don't watch and you don't look all the time. I want you to walk through life for the next week or two, and I want you to look down. And I want you, when you're walking the street, or when you're walking across the street, or when you're in a store, in the grocery store, or wherever you work or walk, look down. And she said, I guarantee you that every day you will find a penny somewhere on the floor. And the reason you'll find it is most people won't stop and pick up a penny. Now, if it was a quarter, they'd stop in a second and grab it. But because it's a penny, it's no big deal, and I'll just leave it go, let the vacuum get it. But those are the blessings in life, and the little blessings are blessings of your family, blessings of your mom and dad, your grandparents, if you still have them, your pets, a lot of things that you would normally not think of, like the pennies. And when you did run across that blessing, you might not think much of it because it doesn't have any value to it. So you need to stop and say, Lord, thank you for the blessings I do have, that I do have a roof over my head and I can pay my bills or whatever the blessing is. And mostly it's just little things that the Lord provides that we take for granted because we're looking for something bigger and we forget about the pennies.
Back there, it's fun to make sure it was still running. Let's pull back just a little bit. Same camera set. Or actually, let's go closer. Yeah, let's go in a little bit more here. Lower. That's closer in than we were before, right? Yeah. Oh yeah. Yep, that's good. You're watching that, okay. We've got about 3 of them, 4 of them, something like that.
We've been going 27 minutes right now.
Okay, that's great. You're doing a fabulous job.
Hmm?
You're doing a great job. Just doing very well. Let's go back to Angel Unaware.
Mm-hmm.
That book changed. A good part of the focus of the film will be on how that book changed the reality for special needs children.
Right.
How they went from being in the darkness to being in the light. So tell us a little bit about the impact of Angel Unaware after your mom finished it.
Okay. Angel Unaware, the book that Mom finished after Robin passed away, had a huge impact on a lot of different people. And I think the biggest impact it really had were on the families that were fortunate enough to have Down syndrome children, because it was always looked on as a stigma. And I think people looked at Down syndrome children as something that they did wrong. It was their fault. Not realizing that God made it possible for them to have one and that it was going to change their life in the future. And like I say, He only gives them to a few. But I think having Robin's story told by Robin herself, that she was okay, that yes, that she had passed on and she'd moved, but God sent her for a short time to be a blessing to Roy Rogers and Dale Evans. That was her job. God sent her there to do that. And I think the reality for a lot of folks who have Down syndrome children, they never thought of it that way, because the public wouldn't let them. The public looked on Down syndrome children as they look on burn victims or amputees, or that they're less than perfect. They're not, And instead of coming up and saying, what a beautiful child, they would come up and say, oh, I'm so sorry. Why? They didn't know. They didn't know. They don't. And so the book allowed families to bring out those children with them in public And when the public could actually see the beautiful smiles and the love of music and the excitement in their eyes, and even though a lot of them couldn't talk, there was something there that you had not seen before. And Mom and Dad and us too. I mean, when I was young, when I was only 5, and I probably don't have the recollection, but I didn't see any Down syndrome children out at all. Up until after the book, probably a year or so after the book was released, Mom started looking and seeing them in the audience at where they were, because they felt that, well, if Roy and Dale can be blessed with one of these children and take them home and love them, why shouldn't we? And why should not? This child is special, and that's why they are special children. Special needs children, and they're a blessing. So why shouldn't I take something that I'm proud of out and let them experience the world, which is cruel sometimes, but they're no different than anybody else. They need to have a chance at life like you and I had. And so that book, and it wasn't just Down syndrome children. It wasn't that, because I've had more people come to the show and say, you know that little book, Angel Unaware? She said, I lost my brother. I was only 4 at the time, and I was angry for years. And when I was 13 years old, I did a school project, and somebody gave me that book, and to write a book report on that book. And she said I read it 3 times through, 3 times, one right after the other. And it put such a calming on my heart to know that my brother is not here physically, and I don't know where he's at, but now I know where he's at, and I know that he's not hurting anymore, he's not whatever, and it gave peace to my heart to know that he was okay. And I think that's, all of us want to know that our loved ones are okay, whether they're with us or not. You know, you come to a point in your life where you say, you know, I'm not sure, but I know because of the book and because of it happens to one child, it happens to all children, that they're here for a short time for a reason, and God takes them home. So I'm comfortable with that. And that's why I have a hard time with people who don't believe in God, or they don't have a religion of their own, or believe that there's someone else bigger than all of us. How they get through their life, or get through tragedy in their life, or bad times in their life, without God, without having somebody to pray to and say, Lord, things aren't going well for me, for my family, you know, can you help at all? And if he can, he will. If he doesn't think it's right for you, he won't. And we are of a generation now, of a give me generation, and I'm afraid that a lot of the young people are losing the fact that things don't come easy, and if they do, I can guarantee you won't have it very long. It's fleeting. You need to buckle down and get some more in here before you throw the world away before it's too late. And I think I worry about my grandchildren, great-grandchildren. You asked me one day what I fret about. Well, that's what I fret about. You know, is the world going to be any better than we left it, that our parents left for us? Is it going to be even better? I doubt it, unless the American people finally stand up and say, enough's enough. We need to take back our own. We need to take back our own, what we built, and take it back and control it again.
What did Roy stand for? What did Roy Rogers symbolize to America? Symbolizes that today? Do we have that today?
Well, we don't have it today, and again, I keep going back to the show because I get a lot of some of the greatest stories and the greatest input from your audience, and I spend a lot of time with them. Dustin and I and the band will come down during the show, halfway through, and at the end of the show, and spend as much time as we need to be here talking to the fans until they're all gone. And I get some of the greatest comments, some of the greatest questions and stories from folks that grew up in the era of Roy, because that's who come see. They come and see us, and they'll ask me. They say, Dusty, I'm worried about it. I don't know. The economy's in the tank. we don't know what's happening. What's wrong with the world today? What's wrong with the United States? I said, the problem with the United States today is the man in the White House doesn't wear cowboy boots. That's the way I look at it, and of course I have to, because that's where I come from. But it just seems we need to get back to our roots a little bit, and start thinking about what's important. Instead of we're living in the now and what's for me and how much can I take and grab, be like Americans were years ago, and worry about your neighbors and people who are less fortunate, and who could use a helping hand or just a kind word. Sometimes that's all it takes.
Your dad was well acquainted with suffering, so if you could
Yes.
tell us about his mom, and where I talked a little bit about Arlene and the hospitals that he visited.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to lead that up to hearing about how he saw suffering,
Mm-hmm.
and it really made him question how there could be a loving God.
Right. Well, Dad, he did see an awful lot. At an early age, his mother was stricken with polio when she was 14, 15 years old, and it caused her leg to shrivel. And he to see your mother like that, and know there's no way of, she hobbled around, but she got around fine. I mean, she handled the farm and everything while my grandpa was gone, and Dad and the three girls, they knew they behaved Grandma, because if they didn't, she had a cane that could reach over and give you a knot on the top of the head. And all of us kids when I was younger was afraid of Grandma Sly. She was originally from Kentucky, and Kentucky women are tough. They're tough, and because they grew up at a time when you had to be. Women had to be really tough in those days. And she just and what she said, we had to do. We'd get close to her dolls or something. She'd say, "Hey, get away from them dolls! I'll snatch you bald-headed." Shake the cane at you. But yeah, Dad saw her suffering through life at an early age, and it was tough on him. And he always promised himself, if I ever make enough money in this life, the first thing I'm going to do is buy her a brace. And that's exactly what he did. He got a brace for her leg when he started making a little bit of money. And then of course, he's seen a lot of things, like you said, down through his life with kids in the hospital. Kids loved him. I mean, the kids of America loved him, and it didn't matter whether they were in an iron lung or whatever, because they could still see the movies and stuff. They would play them in the hospitals, and so they were foremost in his mind all the time. When we would go out and do state fairs and rodeos, the first thing he would do is get Trigger out of the trailer, load us kids in the car, get the Sons of the Pioneers, and we'd take off and we'd play a show at a hospital or out at a blind school or doing something. But Dad, all of his life, there was always something that he was almost driven by that. And somebody asked him one time, they said, "Roy, when's the first time you really realized that the kids of America really looked up to you?" And he said, in 1941, playing Madison Square Garden, he said, I was walking back by the cattle chutes, and around the corner come this little guy about 4 years old, dressed exactly like me. He said, that's when I knew that I had to keep my life in line, and that I owed these kids something, because they're looking up to me. I can't say one thing and do another. And so he made a pact then with himself, then good Lord, I'm sure, that he would do everything he could to keep his image so that kids could look up to him and mean something. And of course, then he was hitting hospitals even then. And then when the polio thing was so bad in the 40s and 50s, he would go to the hospitals, and he was fighting all the time in his mind, because I know he believed in God, but he was angry at God somewhat, I think, because he couldn't understand why, if we have such a trusting and just and merciful God, why he would allow children of all things, his youngest creations, to come into this life and be attacked by some terrible disease, or born with deformities, or born, and I'm sure he saw Down's kids at that time too. And so it was hard for him for a long time. He couldn't understand why. He couldn't reconcile why. And so he was almost driven to the fact that he wanted to go and see those kids and entertain them. And many, many stories I could tell you. The one that hits the most is you know, and a lot of the kids who had polio in the 40s were put into iron lungs. Their lungs were undeveloped and they needed help. And so these machines, iron lungs, would help them breathe a little better. Of course, they were in this big iron tube with their heads sticking out and laying flat, of course, and looking up through a mirror that goes that direction so they could at least see. And Dad would go there, and he would go up to the ward, and he'd bring the pioneers with him, and they'd sing a couple songs. And then Dad would actually go to each iron lung and get around beside the child instead of looking at him through a mirror, so he could get eye contact with him. And he'd lean down and talk to him, every one of them a little bit, and he'd say, you know, Billy, I know you're having trouble, you know, but you know, all good cowboys are tested. You know, you got to buck up a little bit. You got to, you know, the cowboy way is not to lay here and worry, fret about it. It's to fight and get out of here. And he said, I'm going to help you. And he would bring these gun belts with him, kids' gun belts with him in boxes, and he would hang the gun belt up on the mirror. And of course, people thought, well, that's cruel. This poor little kid, he got in his head is all he's got out, and Roy's giving him a gun belt. What is that? But then Dad would say, when you get out of this iron lung, if you fight hard enough and you pray hard enough, you'll get out. You'll eventually get out. And what I want you to do is I want you to wear this gun belt, and I want you to, you know, play cowboy like all the rest of the boys and girls do in the country. And then someday I want you to come to Hollywood and see me. And Dustin will tell you, we've had a lot of, over the last, you know, I've had a band for 40 years. And I have seen so many people that have come that were in iron lungs in the 40s, that Dad came to the hospital, put up that gun belt, and they got out. And of course some didn't, but most of them got out, and they still have a gun belt. So in his somewhat little childish way, and I think that's why kids loved him so much, he was as big a kid at heart that they were. And he would think like they did. If they, you know, he thought if he gave them just a little of encouragement on the level that they would understand, then it might stick better than a doctor coming in saying, you know, well, you know, there's really not much hope for him walking, but you know, we'll give it the best we can. Healing comes from within, too. It's not just what the doctors do. It's what your heart tells you and your mind tells you to do. And if Roy tells you to do it, especially in the 40s, you did it, and it worked really well.
Just switched to the second card right as that was finishing up.
Okay.
Still going. Okay. Looks like we got about 40 minutes on the card.
Pull back a bit. DP, director of photography. Yeah, I like that catching that wheel behind you. That's good. Yeah. You want to stand up at all? Are you doing okay?
That's okay. I got one dead cheek now, but we're all right.
Mine's pretty sore on this thing. I've gotten up twice. Man. That was terrific. I want you to go back to the story about the iron lungs and the gun belts.
Mm-hmm.
Just tell me the fact that they still have the gun belts, and if anybody ever wanted to take it from them, or it's their most prized possession. You said
Yeah.
something like
Okay.
that. Let's
All
do
right.
that clip again.
Yeah, many of the kids come to the show even today. In this last couple of years, I've had 3 in the last couple of years. I try to keep track. I try to get an address from them. A lot of times they'll give it to me. Sometimes they won't, just so I can kind of keep in touch with them a little bit. But they still have the gun belt, and it is their most prized possession. They say if it wasn't for this gun belt, and it's most of the time it's in shatters. I mean, it's just tatters. The leather's worn off, all the spots have come off and stuff. And say I wore it everywhere. And I wore it to bed. My mom used to get so mad at me because I didn't want to wear it in the bathtub, and they'd stop me from doing it. But it was their most prized possession, and still is today. And I think very few things. I mean, I try to think back on my childhood, and I had a wild and crazy childhood, as you can imagine. I can't remember a whole lot of things. I mean, some things I do that stick in my mind, but you can imagine for a child who is sick, to have somebody come that you idolize come to your bedside and say, you know, it's cowboy way, buck up and let's get it done and come see me and give me a gun belt. I mean, that had to be just a huge difference in their life. You know, there's always that one thing that kind of makes a difference in your life, and when, you know, a lot of them didn't make it. I mean, some of them passed away, and polio was a terrible thing until they got Jonas Salk finally got the vaccine and saved millions of little kids. But it was a tough time, and but a special time too.
So after Robin's death, let's talk a little bit about how your mom processed that, and then maybe how your dad processed that, and then how the family grew. Things took change, started to change.
Well, when Robin was born, it had to be a terrible. Again, I was a young boy. I was 4 or 5 years old, and when Robin was born, everybody was. Well, actually, we didn't. The kids. I mean, maybe Cheryl and Lou might have known that there was something wrong with her, but Mom and Dad would tell us that there was something wrong with her. But I didn't see anything wrong with her. I thought she was terrific. Finally, a little girl that was, you know, small, and I didn't, you know, because I had all older sisters, you know, and somebody that I thought, wow, I finally got somebody that'll go my way for a change, you know. So we didn't process. I didn't process it right away, but I imagine for my parents, it had to be I wouldn't say a real eye opener, but it had to be a challenge to. I don't so much their faith, because both of them were very, very strong in their faith. I think they question. We all do, whether we're Christian or whatever our higher power is. When something like that happens, we question. We say, why? You know, why me? What'd I do? You know. So I think there was a little bit of that. I remember when Robin. I mean, many times I could see Mom and Dad holding each other and crying because she had good days and had really bad days. And I think for them, it was a challenge to do their everyday, be in front of a camera, be smiling, doing this when they know part of them is at home, slowly dying. I think in their back of their mind, they were hoping that she would come through it all, but she was so frail and us kids, sometimes we couldn't play with her because we had a cold or whatever, you know, so it was a challenge that way. And they had a nurse that took care of her all the time. There was somebody with her all the time. And so I think there was some questioning of God, you know, what purposes, you know, what we know that you've given this child to us, but why? What is it that you want us to do? What is it that, and that's what Mom, because she said for the longest time I couldn't put the book together because I didn't know what the purpose was. And after she had passed on, and I remember Mom and Dad, the day she died, Mom and Dad, I think they spent at least 10 to 11 hours out in the carport just holding each other and crying. You know, we'd look out the window and they'd just be sobbing, holding each other, and I got to thinking, you know, wow. I mean, you know, again, 5 years old, you know, couldn't understand why we couldn't see Rob, and you know, we didn't know what happened. They didn't know quite how to tell us, I guess, and it was a rough go, and and how Mom and Dad did what they did, and still say Roy and Dale, and still do the obligations that they had in life. And still raise us kids and take care of us and let us know that, you know, Robin was special, and you know, this isn't going to happen to all of you. You're not going to all pass away now. Now don't, you know, she had, you know, and to try to explain that to your kids and make it sound not so bad, but yet it had devastating to them. It's a phenomenal thing, and I think they questioned the grace of God, but yet it was the grace of God who got them through it.
So after the book, I think it's after the book, maybe it's not after the book, but your mom went on a search. Came back What was it like having babies show up, or little ones, brothers and sisters show up?
Well, like I said, my mom and dad, especially Roy, my dad, and of course Mom too. Of course, she was missing Robin. You know, she was missing. There was that link that joined Roy and Dale really together, was this child, and all of a sudden that wonderful bond they had between the two of them and the child. All of a sudden now there's that wonderful 3 links. Now it's down to 2 again, and. You know, Mom, I think, knew that they didn't want to have another child. They didn't want, because at that time they didn't know what caused Downs. They thought it might be an Rh blood factor problem, one negative and one positive in their blood type, but they weren't sure. So when they lost Robin just before her 2nd birthday, it had to be I mean, I know it was very difficult because I saw it, but they got back up on their feet, and the good Lord granted them grace, and they were able to get back up and go. But there still was a void. And they just decided, well, if we can't have any more of our own children, because we don't know if we'll have another Down syndrome child or not, then we'll adopt. And so and I think Dad felt bad for me because I had these sisters, and I had no brother, you know, no male influence. I mean, I had Dale in my life. I had 2 nurses in my life. I had 2 sisters in my life, and even our dog was a female back in those days, so it was tough, you know. So Dad thought, first of all, they were just going to adopt a little boy for me, and they picked out. They went on a trip. Unbeknownst to me, they went on a trip to Ohio, and then went down from Ohio down to Kentucky. Down to Louisville, and they had heard of an orphanage. Dad would always invite orphanages to bring their kids over for the show, and they had a chance to visit one of them, and in Covington, Kentucky, and they ran across this little boy, and Dad was going around shaking hands to all the little boys, and Sandy just stuck out his hand and said, "Howdy, partner," and Dad just kind of fell in love with him. You know, he was just he was stunted in his growth, and he had all kinds of problems. He slept in a chair since he was born practically, and didn't know what a bed was, and they treated him pretty badly. So they said, "This is the guy we got to get for Dusty." And then they stopped by Hope Cottage on the way back home, and they adopted a little American Indian girl, Choctaw Indian, Mary Little Doe, called her Dodie. So I'm coming to the airport thinking I'm going to meet Mom and Dad, and down off the airplane comes Dad. He's carrying this little kid, and Mom's carrying a little girl, a little baby girl. I got to thinking, hey, what's going on, you know? And I've got pictures of our first meeting, Sandy and I first meeting, and I did not like him. I thought, oh, wait a minute, just a minute. Now, I was the prince here, and now all of a sudden I got somebody horning in on my spot. And Mom explained, now this is your new brother. His name is John David Harry Hardy, but we're going to call him Sandy. And this is Dodie. We're going to little Mary Little Doe. She's going to be your sister. Well, Dodie I fell in love with right away, but I had a hard time with Sandy for a while. But we grew to be really good buds, and I protected him a lot because he was smaller than me, and he was, guys were picking on him all the time, and he had a lot of physical problems. And but we became the best of buddies. Dad took us on a hunting trip for a couple of weeks up near Kingsburg, California, and we fished and ate what we caught, and we shot rabbits and squirrels and all kinds of stuff and cooked them out. And after that trip, we were close buds from then on. But there was and then of course that wasn't enough. They a little later on they adopted. They got a little Marion from. They'd gone in 1954. They went to England and Scotland and Ireland and fell in love with a little girl named Marion, or her name was Marion Fleming, and wanted to adopt her and couldn't because international adoptions weren't allowed. So they became her foster parent. And then they adopted a little girl. They wanted to adopt a little girl. There was when the ban on international adoptions was lifted in the 60s. They adopted a little girl from Seoul, Korea. Her name was Inai Lee, called her Debbie Lee. And so it just kept going on and on until they ended up with 9 children total. And boy, it was a bunch. I'll tell you, it was a bunch. And you know, 6 months old, 6.5 months old to 19. You know, Tom was 19, 20 years old at that time. And I tell you, it was wild and crazy. It really was. But Dad pulled us all together and said, hey, you're all the same in God's eyes. You're the same in your mother's and my eyes. You'll all be our kids, and you're going to all be treated equal. Doesn't matter if you're male, female, or black, brown, or blue. You know, you're in the Rogers family now, and you didn't ask to be, but here you are. And so deal with it. And we did. We were left alone on a lot of stuff to think about it and how to work it out ourselves, which I think was good.
So you and Sandy became good friends.
Well, yeah.
And then, I think, so what caused you all to move to Apple Valley? And how did that move go?
We moved to Apple Valley in about 1965, I think it was the year we moved up there. And the reason we moved was that little Debbie, the Korean orphan, the year before, 64, was on her way back from Mexico. The church had done a goodwill mission down there, kind of had a sister church. And the bus blew a left front tire, and it came across the highway down near Oceanside and was hit head on by a station wagon. And of course, Debbie and her friend were sitting right in the front seat on the right side, and that's exactly where it hit. And of course, Debbie was killed. Again, my dad was in the hospital at the time. He had his neck fused, the third vertebrae, fourth vertebrae fused together. He had staph infection. It was in bad shape in the hospital. And Debbie was killed while he was there. And Mom, poor Mom was just, she was a basket case. And they tried to keep all the news away from Dad. Art went to the hospital and tried to keep him from seeing anything or reading anything until everybody could be told. And so, long story short, the Chatsworth place for my dad, I loved it there, but for my dad became a sad place. It was where Debbie was, and you know, he passed her bedroom every day. And Debbie was kind of his favorite. Debbie was very outgoing and would sit and comb his hair, you know, for hours and just, you know, put curlers in it and stuff. And she was kind of his favorite, and she just played it to the hilt with him, and they had a very close bond. So it was very difficult, you know, to come home at night and see her room and see her things. And so Dad just decided we've got to move. We got to get out of here. This isn't the same place that I remember. And so we moved to Apple Valley in 1965. I was already there. I had moved up early. I was there 2 or 3 weeks, well, actually a little longer than that, before Mom came up. They came up around Christmas time, and I started there in September, I think, in school. Senior year in high school, Mom and Dad moved, which was not a whole lot of fun for me. But I, again, learned to adapt, okay? But then Mom and Dad came up, and they got a little house on the highway there. It was beautiful, and Apple Valley was very quiet, and about 8,000 people, and everybody knew Roy and Dale. They kind of left them alone, which was nice, and everything was going really great. And then on October the 31st, my mom's birthday, 1965, got a call from the Defense Department that my brother Sandy had choked to death while serving with the Army in Germany. Well, here we go again, you know. And Dad especially took it really bad. I think both of them, well, Mom did too, but Dad was especially upset over it, and again, questioning, you know, how much more, God, do you have to lay on us before, you know? Well, God doesn't give you choices. He doesn't tell you why, you know, and you may not know the reason for years, but out of those deaths came beautiful books that Mom had written. And then finally I graduated high school there that year, early '66, and went off on my own, but it was never quite the same old place either. I mean, they just got settled in, and again, the good Lord took one of his home. And so we've endured as a family, endured an awful lot. But again, the good Lord blesses those who believe in him and trust Him, and all you can do is kind of lay it on the good Lord and say, you know, if this is what you have for us, then that's what it is, and we're blessed that you were. But it, you know, 3 times for my mom and dad. You're not supposed to bury your children. You're just not. You're not put on this earth to do that, you know. So, you know, I can't imagine. I can't imagine losing my own children before I leave this earth. I can't. You know, it's just something that you can't even comprehend. But to do it 3 times, lose 3 of their kids, whew, it's more than I could think 2 people could stand. But again, it comes back to knowing the grace of God and having faith that there's a purpose. At least you would hope that there's a purpose. And you may not know what it is right away, but there's some good to come of it. And there was out of both of them. There were some great things happen. So
the community in Apple Valley really came around your parents, even though they didn't really know them.
right,
Brought meals.
Right.
Reverend Bill Hansen was a big part of their life.
Very
Tell
much
me a
so.
little bit about Reverend Hansen.
oh, Bill. He, you know, everybody called him Bill. I mean, even though he was Reverend Hansen, he just wanted you to call him Bill. And he was like that guy that is that uncle that you can always depend on. You know, you could call him at any time, any hour. He was one of those fellows who had a congregation that were all of his friends. And a friend, my dad used to always say, son, a friend is a person who you can call at 3 in the morning and he's glad to hear it from you. And that's the way Bill was. It didn't matter what time, day or night, no matter what the situation was in this congregation of the Church of the Valley, he was there for them. You didn't have to ask him. All you did is the phone rang and said, Bill, this is Dusty, I'll be right over. You know, he knew, he actually knew there were problems, and he knew, you know, and he was with us kids when both mom and dad passed away. He was there. You know, I mean, he was the salt of the earth, and yet some people, you have to be called to the ministry. It's not something you say, well, yeah, I'm going to be a minister. That's what I think I want to do. No, you have to be called, and you have to receive these gifts of that from the good Lord, and boy, this man did. I mean, he was the salt of the earth, but also a very strong pillar that a lot of people of the community hung on when there was problems. And I'm sure he had trouble in his own life, things in here, but you'd never hear it. You know, he was just a very compassionate, and he had a soft voice, and his wife, Mary Ellen, just a sweetheart of a lady. Everybody just loved them, and when they decided to retire, it was a sad day. Nobody wanted to see him retire, but even the worker of the Lord is worth his hire, and someday, you know, you need to hang up the halo and take your place in society. But beautiful man, a very strong man of God, and a huge help to the family during some really rough times.
Did he come by when Sandy died? Do you remember
Yes.
him coming?
Yeah.
About that?
Yeah. Well, Dad was off on his own. He sat over there on the desk. There was a small desk just off the dining area, and Dad sat there. Dad was one of these guys that was kind of hard to figure sometimes. You could see him there, and he'd be just sitting there kind of with a blank stare, and every once in a while you'd see his head go down, and he was like he was resting or sleeping or whatever, but he was, you know, sobbing at that time. And nobody seemed to be quite getting through to him. He was kind of off in a place of his own. I went over and talked with him and put my arm around him and told him I loved him, and he said, I love you too, son, but that was about it. I couldn't get any more conversation out of him. But Bill went over to see him and sat there, and Bill didn't say anything to him for the longest time. They just kind of sat there, and Bill would always say, when he first came up to you, no matter where it was, he said, can I have just a little word of prayer with you just for a minute, you know, and he would have a little bit of a prayer, and I think he knew the words to say because he got Dad to start talking a little bit, and you know, anytime you're devastated by something, if you can talk about it, that's why psychiatrists are there. If you can talk about it and bring out what's really bothering you, you might be able to deal with it, and Bill was very good at that. Not only with our family, but with the church family of Church in the Valley too.
Did Did Dad
And
find comfort in playing the organ, playing music?
oh, absolutely, Dad. You know, I've listened to my dad play the organ many times, and I think he only knew 3 songs. He knew Peace in the Valley. He knew there was a commercial for Mexicana Airlines. They say, "Hay que ser Tejelia, Tijuana, Mexico," and they played this thing. He knew that, and he would play it constantly. I mean, it would just drive us absolutely nuts. I said, "Dad, come on, learn something new." So I think he only knew 3 or 4 songs, but he would play all the time. And sometimes just to hear the chords. You know, he would work up different chords and stuff. He had a beautiful Thomas organ. You know, had 3 layers of chords and all kinds of stuff. But yeah, he loved playing that. I think it gave him some peace. It could let him take him somewhere else other than being Roy for a while. So anything that you can do to get away from that helped. Yeah.
So the generation that was the cowboy westerns
Mm-hmm.
is getting older
Yeah.
and trying to preserve Western culture, Western way of life, the Western code, cowboy code. How do we do it? What's the next step? How can it be done to transfer the love of this way of life?
That's a question that all of us in the Western genre, the people that do, especially us who do cowboy music, and you know, cowboy music only goes back to about the 1860s, 70s, 80s in there. And of course, the music of the old cowboys is not the same music that we hear today as far as Western music goes. And so I think everything has to change somewhat. But it's the generation around my generation that our childhood was a wonderful time. I mean, for us, baby boomers. I mean, it was a wonderful time of not worrying about too much of anything, enjoying movies, TV, family, you know, neat cars, hamburgers, and you know, sock hops, and I mean, that's the way we grew up. And we don't want to see that disappear. But I'm sure the fellas that worked the cow camps in the 1800s didn't want to see what happened in late 1700s, early 1800s disappear either. And some of it is saved. I mean, we don't hear music from the American Revolution very much, which is sad because there were some great compositions in that time. Americana music, what I call it, American composer. And so we're concerned that eventually it will wane away. We don't want to see that, so we hold on to it tooth and nail and perform it. Our show specifically, we perform the way the pioneers performed it back in the 30s and 40s. The same harmonies, a little more modern instruments, of course, but same songs.
What's the name of your band, the name of your show? Where do you play?
Well, we play mostly cowboy music. My son Dustin works with me now, so we're doing a little bit more. He's doing some more gospel, Christian music in the show. And we've added, he loves the Zac Brown band, so we've been doing a little bit of Zac Brown stuff in the show, duets and things. But the show is called Roy Rogers Jr. and the High Riders, and of course featuring Dustin Roy, my son. And like I said, I've had a band for 40 years, and we're playing here at the Mickey Gilley Theater in Branson, Missouri. We do a morning show from 10 o'clock. We start at 10 o'clock, and we do a full 2-hour show with a break in between, short break in between. And we reminisce about mom and dad a little bit. I talk with the audience at halftime, tell them stories about the family, and there's a lot of questions all the time. But it's a part of the past that they're still living in. A lot of the audience grew up with Roy and Dale, loved them, and just hate to see it disappear too. But anybody who has, what I tell people, especially after we had to close the museum a couple of years ago, that we're only custodians of history for so long. And then it's our job to pass that history to the next generation. How we do that, and with what compassion and what passion we pass it on, because the generations today, they don't know who cowboys are. They don't know who Roy Rogers is. They didn't grow up in that era. So for them, it's the texting and the game plan and so there's no interest in it. And I think that's probably what's really sad. However, saying that, I have a lot of kids that come to the show whose grandparents who are my age, love Roy and Dale, and they show them the movies, and they show them the DVDs and play the music, and they love it because they're exposed to it. And so I think if we could find a genre to where we could get cowboys and their music and their wonderful ways of life and their codes re-exposed to the kids today, they would love it too. It's just that they don't. You know, everything's Buzz Lightyear and, you know, Star Wars, and which to me Star Wars was just a big Western. I mean, Darth Vader was the bad guy because he wore a black hat, you know, and it's just different today. And so we need to pass that on to our grandchildren in a very positive way and expose them to it. I think that's all we need to really do. But it would be great if we had a hero today for our kids today. I mean, there's so many of the sports figures fail them. You know, they put it, oh, I'd love to be just like him, and then the next thing you know, he's fallen from grace for something that he had done. There's not any heroes that you can hang your hat on that will give you a set of rules to live by like the Cowboys did. The Cowboys had a code. They had a cowboy code. It had 10, you know, usually around 10 things that, and basically my dad's was based off of, every cowboy had their own 10 codes. Dad's was different than Hoppy's. Hoppy's was different than Gene's. Dad's was based on the Bible, and it was based on the 10 Commandments, but it was in child words, but that they could understand. You need to go to Sunday school every Sunday, and you need to obey your parents, and you need to eat all your food and don't waste any. And there were, you know, just basic things that kids they wanted to aspire to because they loved the man that told them that they needed to. We don't have that today. There's nobody out there today to tell our children that that's wrong. What you're doing is wrong. You need to put that up, and this is where you need to go, and make them believe it. There's no reality anymore. And they talk about these reality shows, but most of them aren't reality shows. Give me a break.
You sure you don't need to stand up?
I think if I do,
Could be able to get
my
back
blood will
going.
run to my rear end and I'll pass out.
Ask that question. Had one pop up when we were doing that. Tell me about the impact media has on children, and how we could use media to bring back some of the values that we've talked about. And then tell me your dream of making the Roy and Dale love story.
Having media, how does media really affect young people today? Of course, it's huge. I mean, you know, that started back when my dad was making movies. I mean, the media at that time, I mean, you know, Sugar Crisp and all of those great cereals and stuff, all were sugar, and it was sent toward children because that was the audience. Today, there's so much. I mean, you know, if you get a satellite connection now, there's thousands of channels, and there's nothing to watch. I mean, it's unbelievable that. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I don't look at cable that much, but there's too much thrown at children today at an early age. They can't even be a teenager now. They got 7 years old. They got to be a teenager. They want to look like Barbie, and they want to dress like Ken, and they want to, you know, be Miley Cyrus, or they want to do this, do that, and the other, because that's the thing everybody else is doing. And it was the same when I was a kid. Everybody wanted to be a cowboy. Even the little girls wanted to be a cowboy. They would buy Roy Rogers stuff. They wouldn't buy the Dale Evans outfits. They wanted Roy. So I just wish that the producers and directors and people in the media today would take into account that they're still young. They may be, you know, they may have a spendable income when they're 13, maybe, I don't know. But the target audience for almost everything today is 17 to 27, 30, maybe 40 if you're lucky. Most of it's younger than that. And they'll put commercials on TV, and these little girls look at it, and they think, oh, I want to look like that. And this gal says, I've been using this, and there's not a wrinkle in my face. Well, she's 19 years old. Come on. To get my age, you get wrinkles. And all the cream in the world ain't gonna get it. So it's geared to young people, and I think if everybody just had a little bit of a conscience, but it's so driven by money. My mom used to say, money's the root of all evil, and it is. And it's a shame that we've gotten away from family values, morality, things that should matter seem to be a thing of the past, and there is no path for the children to follow. There is no direct path. It's, this may not be quite right, but if you get away with it, it's not going to hurt anybody. Well, that isn't the way I learned it. I learned if you did that, you got your butt busted. I mean, that's, I got the belt many times when I was a kid. And of course, I get a lot of people say, oh man, you can't bring that up today, your kids will sue you. Well, see, that's how tightly we have screwed ourselves into the ground in this country. Because we've gotten away from what's important, and that's the family unit. My mom used to say, Dusty, when the family unit fails in this country, we are in big trouble. And you can see it every day. You see all these homeless kids on the street that are 12, 13, 14 years old on their own because they can't get along with their parents. And it's because there was no discipline when they were younger to know right from wrong. So they think they know it all, and so they leave the house, at an early age. I don't know where it's going to go. I really don't. But like you, I would love to see and work toward. We can't give up. We got to keep something out there going. We have to keep. If we can't give up on the young people, well, you can't give up on trying to bring values back to America. We've gone too long without values. We've allowed too many people to control our lives. I mean, too few people really to control our lives in the way they think it should be. And yet, the biggest problem we have in this country, even as parents, is apathy. We sit around and we complain about this, that, and the other, and we say, well, that's not right. That shouldn't be. But yet, we say that to ourselves, we say that to our spouse, or maybe to our children, but we don't say it out loud in numbers that count. And we say, well, if it doesn't bother me directly, I don't care what happens. See, now what do we have? Because we've all gotten apathetic, and it's me, and I'm taking care of my own, and I don't care about the rest of the world. That isn't the way this country was founded. It wasn't the thing that our forefathers fought for. It isn't what the Constitution was written for. But yet we've gotten so far away from it, and so far out away from it. I don't know if we can come back. We can if as Americans we say, our children are not junk. God doesn't make junk. They deserve better. What can we show them? What can we give them that's better? And we as people who are Christians and who want something good for our children have to work toward that. We can no longer sit on our hands and worry. You got to get up and make some noise.
What story do you want to see told? Make a plug for the Roy and Dale movie.
Well,
Try to think about a battery change or a tape change. We got 7 minutes left of battery.
All right, how much for tape?
I'm not sure on that one.
Let's just do this one answer. And then,
a project that I've been trying to get done for a long time, while I'm still alive to do it, still physically able to do it, would be Roy and Dale's story. I mean, it's a story that needs to be told. It's a simple story. I mean, it's a simple of two people who happen to be in the right place at the right time, and the good Lord made it happen, and they made a huge influence on millions of kids around the world. That's a great thing. There's not too many people that had the influence that Roy and Dale had in the 40s and 50s and 60s. And I think it's a story that needs to be told. People don't know the love story between Roy and Dale. They read books and stuff like that, and they might be able to put it together. But if we could put together the true love story of Roy and Dale and get it done in a meaningful way that's true to the story, not something that some documentary maker comes along and decides, well, hey, this is the real story behind it, and take it and just completely ruin the story. I want it to be told so that it's the definitive story of Roy and Dale, authorized by the family and the trust and their kids. And it's the definitive story of Roy and Dale. That's what I'd like to see done in my lifetime. Whether I'll get it done or not, I don't know, but I'd sure love to. I'd love to have somebody who has a whole bunch of money that doesn't know what to do with it, that would love to do a great project. That would be the one to get behind.
Good. All right, we're good.
All right.
You know what question I didn't ask is the proceeds from Angel Unaware? The fact that your mom never really saw any proceeds
Right.
from any of your books. So what happened with all the money that your mom made from all the books?
Mom had written 28 books in her lifetime and was working on another one when she passed away. It never got finished, but she had the money on every one of her books sent to some organization, you know, whether it be Unwed Mothers, whether it be Angel Unaware, of course, went to the Retarded Children's Association back in those days, and for kids with Down syndrome. And every book has been donated to one. Cool It or Lose It, there was a really great book for teenagers, and she went. All that went to one of the Youth for Christ. So there was a lot of different ones that benefited from her books, and that was the whole point behind them, was to try to help the situation. She would write about it and then send the money to try to help, which is what Americans should do. You know, don't just think and worry about it. Send something along, get it done.
I think that was fabulous.
Okay.
God bless you.
Enjoyed it. Now I can stand it. Ooh.